Okay, let's unpack this. Today, we're diving into a really insightful conversation. It started with Thierry Baudet and Benjamin Wortman, and then Karel de Langen reacted to it. Really interesting stuff. At its heart, it's all about faith, reason, and, well, the big question of who Jesus is. Our mission for you, our listener, is to explore that tension, between our own feelings and maybe some kind of objective truth about belief. We'll be using these great sources you've shared.
Exactly. And what's really at the core here, I think, is this dilemma lots of us face. How do we square our really personal feelings, our beliefs, with this idea of a universal truth out there, especially with religion? So, yeah, we'll look at where these different voices agree, where they don't, and what it all means for understanding something so fundamental.
Right. So in that first conversation, Thierry Baudet kind of laid out his view. He basically said, look, for most things in life, yeah, there's probably one objective truth. We can mostly know it. But religion, he felt that's different, primarily subjective. Maybe truth isn't fully knowable there or even the main point. He even mentioned getting called out by a Christian apologist, called his view postmodernist, sort of suggesting feelings were trumping facts for him. How does that fit into this whole modern struggle with belief? And what did Karel de Langen make of it?
Well, that postmodernist label, it really gets at the heart of it, doesn't it? This idea that maybe truth in religion is relative or just unknowable. So we end up focusing almost totally on personal feelings, on experience. But what's interesting is Karel de Langen, in his reaction, he actually agrees with Thierry on one thing. He said, yes, many people do experience faith very subjectively. It is very feelings-based for a lot of folks. He gives the example of Gerben from E.O. Beam saying his certainty came from feeling it in my heart.
Mm-hmm.
And Sam Krin's analogy, liking a song, it's subjective, you might wish others liked it, but it's personal. But, and this is Karel's key point, he argues that not all faith has to be just that. It's not the only way.
Ah, okay. That's a really important distinction, isn't it? It opens up another possibility. So Karel de Langen talks about a different kind of faith, one that actually works with reason, not against it. He calls it rational faith. How does he define that exactly?
Yeah.
He says it's trust in that for which you have good reasons for thinking it is true.
Mm-hmm.
The sources also bring up this philosophical idea, justified true belief.
Mm-hmm.
What does that actually mean for us? How does it connect here?
Yeah, justified true belief. It's pretty foundational in philosophy for what counts as knowledge. It basically means you don't just believe something is true. You have good reasons, justification for believing it. And, well, it also has to actually be true. It connects evidence and belief. Karel uses a really good analogy here. Flying.
Yeah.
You might know intellectually that flying is statistically very safe. You know about the engineering, the pilot training, all that rational stuff.
Right. The data says it's safe.
Exactly. You've got the knowledge, but actually stepping onto that plane, making the decision to go, that takes an act of trust in what you know. It's a willing decision, as he puts it, to trust in what you know. And this is where C.S. Lewis's insight is so sharp. He said the real struggle is often between faith and reason on the one hand and emotion and imagination on the other.
Interesting.
Think about it if you have a fear of heights. That feeling, that emotion can totally contradict your rational knowledge that the plane is safe. It can stop you from trusting even when the evidence is solid. That tension between knowing and feeling, that's where the struggle often lies.
So it's like knowing isn't enough. You have to act on the knowledge, trust it.
Okay. Let's circle back to Thierry Baudet then.
Mm-hmm.
His personal compass, he called it somethingism. A bit vague, right? Believing in something, maybe an afterlife. He said he thought large religions partly approach whatever that something is and felt he'd continue to exist after my body died, but no commitment to specific claims. So if someone wants more than just somethingism, what does Karel de Langen offer? Well, Karel tackles that somethingism head on. He argues for a God who is concrete, knowable, and not just based on feelings, but on objective reasons. He brings up Romans 1.2.
What does that say?
It basically argues that God's nature, his power, can be clearly seen just by looking at the world around us, understood from creation itself. So people are without excuse, it says. The point is, it's presented not as a subjective feeling, but as evidence available to everyone. And Karel details a couple of these objective proofs from the source material. First, nature, the universe itself, its complexity, its design, it points towards an intelligent designer. I mean, we kind of intuitively get that life doesn't just pop out of non-living stuff, right?
Yeah.
And all the complex information, like in our DNA, doesn't just happen randomly. It suggests an intelligent source. The second proof is conscience, that inner moral law we all seem to have, knowing right from wrong. Karel argues this points to a moral lawgiver who is beyond humanity itself. So these aren't just personal feelings. They're presented as universal signs pointing towards God.
That definitely builds a case for an objective God.
Yeah.
But how does that square with Thierry Baudet's very real, almost emotional connection to Jesus? He found Jesus incredibly inspiring, felt deeply emotional about him, even said the biblical claims could be true, but he respected a plurality of beliefs, didn't make truth claims himself. So from this more objective viewpoint, is Jesus just a great teacher, or is there more?
Yeah, it's a great question.
Yeah.
Because the sources really emphasize that Jesus himself, well, he didn't really leave the just a good teacher option on the table. He made some pretty extreme claims about himself, things no other major religious figure claimed. Like, he didn't just say he had the truth, he said he was the truth.
Right. I am the way, the truth, and the life.
Exactly. And remember when he told the Jewish leaders, before Abraham was born, I am, that I am was a direct echo of God's own name revealed to Moses? They knew exactly what he was claiming. That's why they wanted to stone him for blasphemy. He also used that title, Son of Man, which points back to a divine figure in the Old Testament book of Daniel. And he did things only God could do, like forgiving sins directly. And crucially, he accepted worship. In the Bible, worship is only for God. He never corrected people for worshiping him. Even his crucifixion, the charge was blasphemy because he claimed to be the Son of the Blessed One, God's Son. So it leads to this kind of logical challenge, often credited to C.S. Lewis, the liar, lunatic, or Lord Trey Lemon.
Explain that.
Well, if Jesus made these claims, he must be one of three things. Either he was lying, knowing he wasn't God, or he was a lunatic, sincerely believing he was God but being delusional, or he actually was who he claimed to be, Lord. And the sources argue that liar and lunatic just don't fit. His moral teachings were unparalleled. Would a liar die for his lies? And his wisdom doesn't sound like madness.
Okay, so if we follow that logic and consider him Lord, that brings us straight to the resurrection. The sources quote the Apostle Paul saying, "If Christ has not been raised, your faith is futile." It's central. This isn't just presented as a nice story, but as a historical event with real consequences. How does Karel approach the history of it?
This is where Karel really digs into the historical evidence. And he stresses, importantly, that the New Testament isn't one book. It's a collection of independent accounts.
Multiple sources.
Yes. And he even quotes Gert Ludman, who's an atheist scholar, admitting the death of Jesus as a result of crucifixion is indisputable. So the starting point Jesus died is historically solid. Then the sources lay out three key historical facts that most historians, regardless of their own beliefs, generally accept and that need explaining. 1, the empty tomb, found by women, which is significant because back then, women's testimony wasn't highly valued. If you were making up a story, you probably wouldn't make women your primary witnesses. 2, the appearances. Multiple different people and groups of people claimed they saw Jesus alive after his death. Not just one person having a vision. 3, the disciples' transformation. These guys went from being terrified and hiding to boldly proclaiming the resurrection, willing to suffer and die for that belief. Something changed them dramatically.
Okay, so you have the empty tomb, the appearances, the changed lives.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the conclusion drawn in the sources is that most historians have basically given up looking for a natural explanation that fits all these facts. No single natural theory like they stole the body or everyone hallucinated or they went to the wrong tomb credibly explains all three pieces of evidence together. So many historians, even skeptical ones, struggle to find a plausible natural cause, which leads to the argument that the best explanation, the one that fits the facts, is supernatural, that God actually raised Jesus from the dead.
That is. Yeah, that's powerful historical reasoning. It makes me think back to Benjamin Wortman. He was sensing something divine in Christianity, comparing it to Islam, where he didn't quite feel that. And Cherry, too, saying, Jesus emotions me so much, talking about the love God has for you, God being willing to come to you. This next point feels really central.
It really is. Karel expands on that divine element in Jesus. He says it's not just about truth, but also about profound goodness and beauty. He paints the crucifixion as this most extreme story you can imagine, a limit story, he calls it. It reveals both the depths of evil and the heights of love.
How so?
Well, think about it. Jesus, completely innocent, who only healed and loved, gets the absolute worst punishment imaginable. The source mentions Jordan Peterson's description crucifixion as incredibly painful, slow suffering inflicted on someone totally innocent, while a criminal gets released instead. That story, Karel argues, forces us to confront the darkness, the evil, not just out there, but potentially within ourselves too. The sins of Pilate to Judas are also within us, the source notes. And Jesus compared himself to that bronze serpent Moses lifted up in the desert. Remember that story?
Vaguely, yes.
The idea was looking at the serpent brought healing. Jesus, lifted up on the cross, took all our badness, our sin, onto himself to bring healing and restoration. And the sources stress the sheer uniqueness of this narrative. No other major religion has this story. God sending his own son to be tortured and killed, to die in our place, to bridge the gap, to conquer death itself by claiming, I am the resurrection and the life.
Nothing else quite like it.
Nothing. It's also tied to this idea that some truths aren't just understood intellectually. They have to be experienced, seen, or tasted, like trying to describe an apple's taste to someone who's never had one. The suggestion is that God needs to kind of open your eyes to grasp the truth, the goodness, and the beauty, all wrapped up in Jesus and his story.
So after all that, what does this journey mean for you, the listener? We've gone from faith as maybe just a feeling, where objective truth seems fuzzy, to looking at faith as rational trust, built on reasons, focusing hard on Jesus' claims and the historical case for the resurrection, from something courageism to something very specific.
Yeah, and we saw Benjamin Wortman was already sensing that unique divine aspect, getting very close. But like the flying analogy, knowing the plane is safe isn't the same as getting on board. You have to take that step. The sources suggest having those good reasons is the crucial groundwork. But the final step, it's presented as a personal act of trust, described as praying, confessing, believing Jesus is Lord, and accepting that promise of life he offers. Which really leaves a question for you to ponder. If you find yourself having good reasons to think something is true, what, if anything, holds you back from trusting it?